Hello there, and welcome to the value of everything. So, we are quite economical or economics based last week, and as great as that is, I don't think that's quite so pleasant for everybody. So, I think we will explore something on the lines of theories on the future. So, futurist sort of theories that I've just been sort of plotting together. I really just I seem to come up with just some very vague little idea that I put down as something, and I think it's going to be some complete show, and then I never really build from there. So I've just merged a number of ideas, which I'll just go over and then see if I can just turn this into a show on itself. Okay, so obviously, where you're looking into the future, it gives us some good foresight as to where humanity potentially is heading. Potentially, it does give us some particular views as to what could be future trends in the future, and gives us an idea as to potentially build and provide products for certain things that we require in the future. So maybe if you're an investor, or if you want to be an entrepreneur or a businessman, there is it's always good to have the finger on the pulse of potentially future ideas, or even just like reading science books and things like that, because you obviously do have the opportunity of really taking an idea, adapting it, and raising the living standards for all. Okay, so I really want to just start to explore just things about our bodies more than anything else. I think I do seem to go over our bodies more than anything else, because I know that that's the one thing that may be changing a little bit over time and may have the biggest difference on ourselves. So, what has changed the most with our bodies over time is the fact that we've had this little gadget in our hands that we can never really remove ourselves from. So we have the cloud or the internet in our hands, and we can always obtain any kind of information, order any kind of goods with our fingertips, and communicate with anybody in a split seconds, and that does revolutionize everything. And it has obviously been revolutionizing everything for the past 10 plus years, because we have now a mobile device which enables us to communicate and exchange information. Okay, so what potentially can be changing over times? Now, I was looking in a museum yesterday, and I noticed that there was all these it was like a wildlife photography museum, and some of the pictures were absolutely amazing and could never really be reproduced with human eyes. There's particular lenses which could allow certain kinds of light rays into the picture and produce some amazing, incredible results. There was, I guess, certain lenses which allowed certain certain amounts of light. There's just a different sort of level of energy and vibrations which were going through these lenses, which the human eye is only adapted to in its certain environment. So maybe the human eye is probably very versatile in itself, but it does require, it's capable of, like, for example, reading and focusing at short range. It's quite good at looking out on a plane and seeing any prey at a distance. There is quite a lot of versatility there where we can specialize and go from a fair distance. However, we haven't got specialized eyes, and we do not have I guess we do have like focus and zooms and things like that, but we don't have obviously anywhere near as the kind of variety of what a camera can do. And obviously the camera still is just relaying it back to our eye anyway, so that's an interesting perspective there. but to bring out certain amounts of colours and perspectives and seeing things that you hadn't seen before, you would probably need some kind of change to the lens in your eye, which would give you an incredible amount of more information that you would be taking into your mind. So I don't think maybe your mind is probably capable of or has practiced the amount of information that's coming into the mind. Remember, when a baby is born, it can't really focus on anything because it's just too much information. It's information that hasn't been translated into a correct language yet. That's probably one of the reasons why it takes a long time for that child to really get a grasp and things like that. And then over time, that adaptability starts working, like when a child starts to walk as well. So it is incredible how potentially that the lens. I hate my eyes being like, I could never really do that thing where you change your lenses in your eyes. I can't think of the word what they are, but yeah, it's incredibly. I just get really squeamish when it comes to touching eyes or anything like that. But yeah, one of the potentials is that we may have some kind of adaptation to eyes. Maybe we may have glasses or something that comes over our eyes, which gives us a certain level of adaptability, which we can see in a much more of a varied or much more of a vivid color pattern scale than what our human eyes can have the ability to work around. An interesting thought that I just popped into my mind there is that this gives a certain advantage to, say, a child that was being born to this to a grown adult that hasn't had this over time. There is certain levels of neuroplasticity which can adapt to certain things, but if these devices which can enable us to see a much greater scale of color or maybe a larger scale of hearing, then you would need to really grow up and have the child sort of just go through the flow of like learning these senses over time. Rather than just having some 40-year-old man just getting used to them. But it still may work. But it's interesting how there may be some kind of advancement with the youth more so to adapt to this kind of extra sensory equipment in comparison to the older folks. So I always say that there's potential for longevity in the future, but there where you can download old minds, there may be certain reasons to have a new generation which has got the neuroplasticity to adapt to the extra senses, the extra information, and adapt to their environment. Okay, so I mentioned that obviously there's microphone for ears. Now, obviously, contact lenses you can put over your eyes, and that does give you a different lens perspective of distance, which can enable you to look in different ways. I'm sure you can probably put a different shade over your eyes, like what sunglasses can do, and that can give you different colors which come into your own lens and focus. But I'm talking something that can literally just for pixel advance the image that you are seeing to being something a lot greater and read things which are on different sensors outside of your body, which can see things and pick up things that you're not quite seeing. Let's say, for example, X-ray vision, but I don't think that's really quite capable unless you are throwing X-ray around to people, which would be quite dangerous. Okay, so the next up, microphone for ears. Obviously, hearing aids have been available for quite some time. I guess there is a large range of sound which the human ear again isn't capable of hearing. It's a strange one here because I guess with the advancement of new technologies, there isn't really, high frequencies and low frequencies don't really connect to me in much of a way. I can't really understand or know the purpose of what's finding out about high frequency and low frequency. But I know certain things like low frequency is a little bit harder to understand than a higher frequency. So That's one thing. I guess with low frequencies and high frequencies, there is a certain element of how far the distance can be traveled. So if I can put out in my vocal cords, which probably my vocal cords cannot do high frequencies, but if I did have an adaptability where I could throw out a high frequency message, then that could travel a greater distance than what would a low frequency message. So say if I was in a forest and I got a bit lost, I could call out with high frequencies, and then that could have the adaptable advantage of being sent out. But probably once we get to that stage anyway, I'm probably sure that we would have fairly sophisticated technology. We might have drones flying around us and GPS, which was highly advanced at that point, which we wouldn't really require these very high-pitched and low-pitched voices, but I guess people would like to play with these technologies. So yeah, there's just a few little ideas with just our sensory adaptations which can happen over time. There's important things just to consider there. And obviously we've got technologies like Google Glasses, which may be coming onto the fro, but I'm thinking there might be just more so invasive surgery, which could adapt our hearing and our... Ah, yes, this is the other part that I wanted to go into as well. So another area as well is... Sorry, I stopped my sentence there before. Is our sense of smell. Now, the sense of smell, I think, at the best of the time, isn't probably the best sense. However, it's probably only good for a couple of things, more so than anything else. One of them is warning. So if I can smell gas, potentially I could think there's a danger. If I can, I can smell fire or smoke. There's certain senses there which are very helpful for dangers. Also, there is a definite example where... Ooh, this is entertaining, so this might go a little bit further as well. Stretching our imagination for food may require smell to be enhanced. So food is obviously a pleasurable, entertaining thing that we like to do, and I think pretty much if we shut down our nose or blocked our nose off, you can't taste probably... I think it's something ridiculous, like 80% of the flavour is almost gone out of the food. So there potentially is certain areas there where you could advance the smelling range of your nose, which could advance the ability for you to taste foods in different ways and manners. And if you had the sensory power of the dog's nose, then it's unknown really exactly how well that could adapt. It's hard to tell exactly how that would work as well, because I always think there's a very organic nature with having loads of sensory receptors to a nose, whereas with hearing and eyesight, it's more like sensory... I guess sensory design has already been adapted for that sort of thing. I know that we've always mentioned in the past that the next television would have smell to it, so you could have smelly vision, but although it may be fairly okay just to create a TV set, advance ourselves with a higher adaptation of smell, it's probably very difficult to give ourselves a TV or some kind of element which can spray out that kind of smell into our living room. Sorry, I weren't explaining that too well. So if we had smelly vision, you couldn't really have every conceivable smell on a palette which could be generated into a room at any stage. It's pretty hard to do. But from a personal level, if you're just walking around your environment, there is definitely the potential for having increased receptors in your nasal passage or whatever else that would be happening, so that you would have a heightened sense of smell. There is a definite thing here as well, where smell connects with nostalgia. So if you remember that when you've walked into a room and you've smelled a particular kind of cooking, you can recall how that was pretty amazing. And I'm not sure why this traffic is going like this. Why is this going like this? One sec. The traffic lights are out. All right. Okay, we're good. Sorry. So with this adaptation to smell, there's memories which can be changed. So there's nostalgia and everything else. Now, when I mentioned that when you have this new technology which increases your senses, then there needs to be some kind of neuroplasticity to advance or improve that sense as well. Now, it's always interesting as well with me, is where it's mentioned before, is that with the brain, there is still this potential that everyone says that the brain hasn't used its full capacity yet. There is still this element where the brain is not been fully used to its maximum potential. People have had like half their brain blown out and still been able to function. So where I say that there should be certain elements of neuroplasticity to the brain which can adapt to this technology, maybe the brain, the wetware which we already have, can adapt to a heightened sensory environment. I am aware as well that, and I think this is potential for anybody, is that if somebody does focus on long-range things for quite some time, I've done that for a little bit, and I'm pretty much sure that that's increased my eyesight, or at least given me a good recognition ability for seeing things at high distances. Long distances. I think that you may have a certain adaptability if you focus on one element. If you continuously focus on your sense of smell, then after a week, then I would imagine that you would probably have a heightened sense of smell, being very focused on that one area of discipline of senses in comparison to others. So there's still this element that if I do increase the capacity of one sense or all your senses over each other, then you still would have to block out one sense to the other just so that you could smell on one side. So I always hear that if you have a deaf person, they've got a very good acute sense to hearing because their mind is pretty much predominantly focused upon their hearing sense alone, which is pretty amazing in itself. So there is this kind of theory which could adapt to sensory adaptations. And maybe what I'm trying to get to here is that we may need to flick switches. So really, because the sense is so strong, we may need to switch off other sensors to actually really focus on one area. So say if I've got a sense of smell, I know that people they do blindfold food testing sometimes. You can sometimes it can improve the flavors in your mouth because you're only focusing on that thing alone, and you can taste the textures and all those kind of things. Maybe that's probably the requirement with these senses in the future. Maybe we need to switch one sense off to another just so that we can focus predominantly on one specialized discipline or one entertainment. Okay, so I've just sort of run through some fairly important senses. There is obviously senses of our body as well. Now, our senses of our body, I didn't really do too much of a theory behind this one, but there is obviously a definite potential that you can adapt your skin to have more sensory factors. However, there is this little element or problem which we have, is that if we have a highly sensitive body, as great as it may be, we do have the problem with pain. And if I am as sensitive as a baby, for example, then I'm going to find pain incredibly bad, even if I just remotely cut my hand and stuff like that, which doesn't really hurt myself too much nowadays because I have over time burnt my hands and things like that, so it doesn't really hurt as much. So yeah, it's there is a to and fro, and there is a certain element of cost which could happen on this. Maybe there is a fine tuning or a right balance where you could have all of those senses working in unison to a fairly good degree that it doesn't switch off the mind's capacity for one thing to another. But I guess that is a bit of a balancing effect, and it does depend on the person itself. I know that a lot of people would mention about me is that I can really remain focused on one thing alone, and people can be waving to me at the street, but I will be focusing on a podcast or whatever else, and I'm totally oblivious to my environment while I focus upon one thing. So there is, I don't know, there may be certain innate things where people can be very wary of their entire environment, and some people can very much so zone out and be intertwined with a certain sense, or be taken out with a certain dream state. Who knows exactly what would happen to dreams or anything like that once this vivid state of imagination could be adapted to everything else. Which ties into my next point. So, captivating one's imagination. So, I've mentioned before with the smell, heightened sense of smells and stuff like that. With that extreme sense of smell, there's a memory bank. So for every smell that you smell, you can remember that there was some certain danger which happened in the past. There was some kind of disgusting smell, so that you've got a memory bank, or you remember people's reactions to this certain smell. There's all these kind of things which you have memorized to interconnect with certain smells. So like cooking from a partner or wife or something like that, you remember, and it's a special moment or special time. This is all intertwined with your memory. Now, there is so this is an important factor here as well. So I'm just going to focus on memory for a bit here, and you're going to have to just, if you haven't heard many of the previous podcasts here, I'm just going to have to just forewarn you that I'm just going to go into a little bit of a very futuristic sort of state here now. So where we go into memory, we do have the adaptability of changing or adapting the human to use potentially hardware with our software, or like our wetware, which is our brains. So we can create certain databases, or like have memory or hard drives which can store data of these sensory perceptions. So where I talk about smell, we can potentially increase our database of smell so that we can have this adaptation. So I mentioned before, maybe our brain is not fully utilized, so it may have the ability to adapt to all of these extra senses, but we may also require hardware from computers to give us greater capacity for memory. Now, this is interesting in itself, because once we start storing memory to databases, which I would imagine would be attached to the cloud or the internet, we do have a certain stroke point in time, or the age of man, where we can adapt to the singularity, and we can get to a point of uploading memories from one person to another. So firstly, I would say potentially you could get to a point where you can upload databases of sensories of smell, so you're highly aware. So you could have Ray Mears' sense of smell in the woods, so that he knows exactly what are the good smells and the bad smells in the environment of walking around the woods. But we could get ourselves to the point of uploading these databases from one person to another to, in fact, a point of which we get to uploading memories from one person to each other. Now, I'm sort of just I'm slowing down this movement of us all uploading to the singularity, and I'm just showing you just some of the little dots that can be steps from one point to the next in terms of the human humanity just connecting all onto the singularity. Which I'll just make a certain point here as well. The singularity is already existent now. We do have the internet and we do have mobile devices where we're all connected on services like Gmail and Facebook. We're all interconnected on a World Wide Web, which potentially could be called a singularity, where we're all stored on this database of servers which sends and transfers information. So, okay, so we already do things like upload photographs, which is an instant photo of memory in a singular point of time. We upload, and this is just something that we do generally. We don't necessarily do movies too much, and we probably don't do voice as much as I'm doing voice now, but we don't really upload voice as much. So, it's pretty much easy to just keep your self-image and photograph that, but it's probably a little bit harder just to find general shit to talk about, and it probably requires a little bit of, I guess, confidence, bravery, things like that. But yeah, give it a go. Yeah, so transferring memories and thoughts and ideas, which I'm doing right now to you, is another point of us interconnecting. I'm giving you these great, well, not great, well, depends on what you perceive them as, but these ideas are transferring over to you. And we obviously have movies. We've had movies from a very long, for a very long time. Obviously, we had radio beforehand, but I guess all old radio shows weren't really recorded and memorized as much. So a lot of that's been lost over time. But we do have this thing of movies which have been kept and collected, or TV shows which have been on, which get stored on things like YouTube and things like that, and these memories are encapsulated and kept over time. So we do now have this extended range of memories which we can keep and upload into a singularity or consciousness. And I guess there is a priority system which we can adapt, so we can say, okay, well, this kind of information is fairly useful to us now. We can use that information, and maybe that gives us better foresight in the future. Hence why I do these kind of podcasts. And maybe there's certain elements of nostalgia, which I said about where you had a heightened sense of smell. There's a database of that. So we have all these servers and databases of information, which is already out there in Silicon Valley, mainly, wherever else. But there's plenty of potential for other places as well, which stores all this information, and we can upload and transfer this data from one person to another. And this is a very voluntary method of doing so. Now, just remember these little steps, one step forward. So we have heightened senses of perception, and then we walk a little bit further down the path, and we use these heightened senses and transfer them from one person to another. So we've already got this adaptation for smell, but then we've got an ability to record the feeling or the what happened in our brains when we sense this smell, and now we can transfer this over. So there's another sense as well, potentially emotion. Maybe we can transfer emotion. Now, obviously, if I connect to you in an emotional way, I can transfer emotion that way. I'm a little bit monologue-y and a little not very sort of. I'm probably not conveying much in the way of emotion, but there is a way of transferring emotion. But I'm talking about potentially just transferring the emotion or the nostalgia in that moment, transferring it over to the other person. So, let's say that you're playing a first-person shooter, and really you can be completely surrounded in the environment, the sounds, the everything else, but then we can add the smell, which hasn't been really adapted in technology nowadays, and then we may be able to interconnect the emotion as well. So it may be that you could have this heightened, this sensory feeling of what it would be like to have a load of fear, or I don't know what the main cortisol, which is flowing through your body when you have this fear experience. Who knows exactly what this is? Obviously, we're getting to a point of drugging ourselves at this point, or drugging ourselves with human stimulants. But there is this element where we're transferring emotions, memories, associations to things on a database. And as we get a better ability to read these things, there is this stronger database which not only can just record and people just out of curiosity reads, but maybe has this portfolio like where you have, I guess, you can have computer music software. You can download an entire library of instruments. Maybe you may be able to download libraries of feelings, senses of smell, these heightened, advanced senses which you haven't seen before. So there's different ways or adaptions to see things in different ways. So maybe what I see things, I maybe focus on things incredibly strongly, and maybe you look at the entire picture. There's maybe there's certain ways that we can flick a switch and adapt our senses to the environment. And there may be a database in the Singularity which can adapt or advance the human to see these things in a different way. Now, I guess once we start, there's this little point in time where I just start to feel to myself, are we actually starting to lose our humanity or our humanness or our individualism, which is always one of those points where I get to that thing. But I guess if we all have the same motivations essentially, and if once we start to transfer these feelings or these sensors, I guess we start to understand that we are closer related to each other than what we are. And I guess there's different times that people have been living. Everyone has had a different experience. Everyone's got this sort of environment that they've lived in for a certain time. And people are at different stages, milestones of their lives. People have ingrained virtues at different levels. People have got curiosity. People see things from different perspectives. But having this channel where we can transfer ideas and perspectives, emotions, different perspectives of how to view our vision, how to view things, this is an element of philosophy as well. Obviously, we always think of things from our own eyes or our own world and see the evils of everybody else, but we don't start to think or contemplate about these people that do these things to us and see maybe that they had a bit of a tragic life to lead them to that point. So it's kind of interesting, and I guess there will be some kind of moderate tone in the Singularity or the time of that age where people would start to see things from different people's perspectives. And then obviously where we transfer these ideas and these perspectives and things, yeah, there's this improved there's a definite idea generation thing that's connecting from that point as well. Now, I've mentioned that there's something called AAI, which would be artificial aided intelligence. I haven't really even touched upon this when it connects to these heightened senses. But I've got the feeling that we're not going to really. You potentially would have computers which are autonomous and have coded scripts where they can think for themselves, but I would say more so than anything else, they're really going to be just intertwined with humans, so they're a little bit more cybernetic, and yeah, they can extract and retain information or provide information to you at the click of your fingers, so that you can request a certain feeling, a certain time, and that can be transferred. So I'm just going to cross over now, and I'm just going to go into a couple of other elements. I'm not sure how they dovetail into one another, but I think I'll try and work out something here. So one of the other ideas that I mentioned beforehand is that where we potentially have these heightened senses, we have this artificial intelligence and everything else, we are really getting a little bit limited in the sense of time that we have, because obviously we may have a biological clock which is clicking down before we do completely waste away, and potentially we may be able to replace body parts or certain organic points of our bodies, but maybe the brain can't quite be adapted as much as everything else, because that is the most complex organ in the world, or the universe, or as what we know. But there is this thing of scarcity of time still. So we may be able to live in these vats where we just only live in a virtual realm, and we can adopt avatars and we can adopt senses. But we do have a little bit of an issue in terms of time. Now, I guess one thing with time is that if you are moving very fast, or if you're burning through and you can do things pretty rapidly, then you can do a lot more in a shorter space of time. So if you think of how computers have advanced over time, if you think of like where you used to load up a game and it would only take you a little while, now you've got this faster computer and it processes the job a lot quicker. Well, then therefore you have got a time scale change. You have got the ability now to do a lot more things in a shorter amount of time, and the timescale factor has improved rapidly. So to change time and our focus on time, we may be required to adapt a system where the human mind is working incredibly faster than what it does beforehand. So let's say, for example, like we have days and everything else. Now that we can much more fastly process ideas, and things come to us a lot quicker. It's probably much better or we can multi-process. So there's a potential for us to live in multiple states. So maybe we may be able to have multiple experiences happening at the same time. There is this slowdown of time factor which is occurring. So we, as our potential mentioned, we can, rather than our exploration into the point of going into outer space and speeding into the future, it's more of a perspective of us going more into ourselves, into our minds, into our multi-dimensional minds, which can focus rapidly on loads of things and slow down. Even though we are speeding through a number of experiences, number of ideas, maybe we are slowing. We are trying to slow down the process of age. Maybe where we're all sitting in these vats, and the planet doesn't even really have too much of a life support factor anymore. We're still just speeding through all these ideas and events and memories while we're just in this point of time. And I guess the universe is a bit of a cold and bleak environment as to what we can do with it and things like that. So it's kind of interesting in that perspective. I just wanted to throw in here 2 points. It's kind of interesting that we've got two major important factors of humanity. One thing is the universe, so an actual point in which we are limited in the sense of how far we can really stretch ourselves. Now, obviously, we have managed to put a man on the moon and things like that, but there is a certain limitations of man which does enable us to push us and flourish us further with our ideas. Another thing as well, which is very important, is that we are mortal. So if we have an area where we become immortal, or an environment where we're immortal, then maybe that's sort of like a trading agreement. So we have property rights. Once we don't really think that there's any requirement for property rights any further, then we can just really not even focus on doing anything at all. We don't really have to worry about sex or anything like that, because there is abundance of everything and we don't bother. So environmental structures where there is life and death and pain and anguish, and there is limitations to the environment, is very important to mankind itself. If we do not have those things, then we do not flourish. We just really just go into some kind of very violent, potentially violent anarchic state where there is no property rights, there is no, if everybody can survive or live forever, there's longevity and things like that, then it's fairly interesting. So I would also potentially always mention that there is this element where you would really need to go back into simulation. You may need to require to go back to simulation, understand the mind with certain limitations. Because if you're in a state of living in a vat, which can transfer body parts and make you live forevermore, or you can transfer purely onto a hardware, and you can live for extended, ridiculous amounts of time, and you can experience many different people's lives and take from it different things, then you really want to experience things which have limitations. Really going onto God mode, where you can start blowing up the planet and doing all these kind of crazy things, really doesn't improve or give us any kind of discipline, and discipline is a very important factor in these things. So yeah, sorry about that little warped brain bubble there, but I just thought that might be fairly useful. Now I just want to go over one little thing as well of ideas and thought generation as well, while we're on this a little bit of a subject. Now, as we interconnect and we make ourselves more so understanding of people's perspectives and understanding of different things, I would also make a point that there's obviously objections to any of these ideas that I mentioned. People don't maybe necessarily want to live in a vat. It doesn't really sound very appealing to me myself when I mention this. But there's definite options to go inside and outside of this vat. But there's also in the elements of experience. When we have very vivid experiences of things, or we take things for what they are, then there's, I guess, what's the word? If we live in the exact experience of that person itself, then there's nothing really gained, nothing really learned. But if I assumed my body into your experience, then there's a different thing that's occurring here. We are having a slight variance of what would happen beforehand to a certain degree. Okay, so what I'm trying to get to at this point here now is an idea of how we hear things, and then that can inspire certain ideas. And if the idea is muffled, or there's a certain distortion in that idea, that distortion can give us a certain level of adaptability to ourselves. All right, I'm probably confusing you at this stage, and I've probably gone over too many subjects in one podcast for you to really concentrate too much on this, but I'll just go on this point here. So I've sat in a different room before, and I've listened to music through that doorway, and I can't recognise. I've got a non-recognition of what the song is through that doorway. Now, at this point in time, I'm hearing a beat, and there's some kind of thought or structure which is coming together in my mind, which is producing some kind of song, and it almost connects to me like it's a new song which sounds fairly awesome. Now, I know that where you listen to songs, there is an element of nostalgia which occurs, which you can pick up certain elements at different times, which interconnects to your own memory. But this is probably an interesting point of creative pattern thinking which could occur here. That I listened to this song, and then I've almost created a new song in my mind. If I could write music down, then this would be amazing. But obviously, I don't have the ability to do this. So when I come out of the room and I listen to the song, then I instantly recognize the song as something that I've listened to before, and it's not actually the song that I was actually, through my muffled way of listening to it, was what I was listening to in the first place. So everything comes back to me, and then I realize, okay, it's just some regular song that I've listened to. But I'm pretty aware that I've created a different song in my mind from which had derived from this muffled background noise. So yeah, just interconnecting this with all the theories that I put it before in this show, there is this potential where we live in different experiences, take on different smells, or take on different visions, or different ways to use our visions. There is this creative thought pattern, or this idea expansion, which can occur and expand ourselves to think a lot more rapidly. Or when I say think, create ideas a lot more rapidly. So where we say this age of information, this is where we're transferring things over. We may get to a point of the age of creativity. So where I mentioned about you have things like computer-aided design, which is CAD, but you may have artificial-aided design, where artificial intelligence-aided design, which can expand on things, and with this sensory muffledness, which can be adapted from your own perceptions, then we have this absolute flourishment of creative ideas which can expand from this point in time. So yeah, there's this adaptation here as well. So it's an important thing to just think about there. And I think a lot of creative ideas have happened from haphazard, and things that weren't really meant to be has occurred. And so you do have, adaptions which occurs. And now another thing that I remember as well is that if you do certainly focus on one thing, or you perceive things as one thing, you do potentially have the ability, where there's certain muffledness, there is strength on other senses and different abilities that happens. So my son speaks in his own language, but he's got his connotations perfect. He understands how to say things. He knows like the basic words and things like that, but he doesn't quite really understand language that well. We try and talk to him as much as we can, but it's just one of those things that develop a little bit later. But in the meantime, he's pretty much devised his own language, where he maybe just be speaking gibberish, but he thinks that he's communicating effectively to us, but he's really thinking that we are communicating in a way of connotations. The connotation is the correct method of getting your view and point across. Now, it's going to be interesting as once he gets to a point where he thinks, okay, right, actually there is actual language and there is actual meaning behind the words in which we say, but over time, he's probably going to have a fairly strong adaptation of connotation. So he may get very strong connotation. He might have a very strong connotation ability. Maybe his vocabulary is a little bit limited to other school kids at the time, but there is certain things in which where we're limited on knowledge or factors or ideas. So I remember that I mentioned about in isolation, there's different things that can blossom. So where you have in Japan, they use sushi and sashimi because they're used to this idea that where they've had this certain amount of resource, which the UK could never even really imagine, even though they are an island nation which is surrounded by water. It's interesting how certain restrictions of senses or sensory deprivation can create different ideas in the meantime and give us certain adaptations and advantages in the future. So it's senses are fairly important, and particularly where it comes to our creative passions and ideas. Now, this obviously, I'm just going to try and I'm going to really try and I think just give us one little element of philosophy here. Now, so with philosophy and how this interconnects, I guess there's an element of ingenuity and creativity, those kind of virtues which adapt to philosophy itself. And in the path of being good and virtuous, that gives us better abilities and gives us a greater world for all of us to share. There is potential an element where we are becoming or achieving gods of our own selves, and maybe that is the paradigm of our own spiritual nature, is to understand ourselves in such a perfect perspective way that to know thyself, that is one of the obviously the main points in terms of philosophy itself. So there is certain elements of spiritual nature where we become more adapted to our environments, use and adapt certain senses, and derive and span different ideas from the inner perspective of our world. So, thank you if you have really stuck with me all this journey through all these ideas and patterns. I know that I jumble things around and I am a little bit tricky to keep with at the best of times, but I'm always ears to thinking or getting sharing ideas and all that kind of stuff. If you actually, I should have mentioned this at the start, but if you think there's any other ideas that could span off of these ideas, or you've written any notes, or you had a little thought beforehand and you'd like to share it, please put it in your comment section or do a podcast on this podcast, whatever you want to do. And keep the ideas flowing. It's always fairly interesting exercise to do, and it really does improve the mind the more ideas that you try and focus upon over time. If you think about your art school teacher and stuff like that, it's like they're a bit crazy, but it really does improve a certain sector of your mind if you do exercise the creative part of the brain. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for listening to me. It is a wondrous thing to go over and think about these very hard to even communicate thoughts and get these points across. I actually think to myself sometimes these thoughts that come into my mind sound very complicated, but when I start speaking about them, they actually sound fairly simple. but I guess there's just like little levels and grades of how you think of a thought, and then how it just tries to get de-scrambled, I guess, and then just converted into a language which I can relay to you. See what I mean? That's probably explains what I'm trying to say in the first place. Right, so thank you very much for your time. As always, it's been a pleasure. And I'll close this down now. Yeah, we'll be back for more podcasts. And take care of yourselves, and share the comments, and share this podcast if you think it's of any value to anybody else. Thank you. Goodbye.